Hello, David. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Emma.
So, I'd like to get to know a bit about your journey into Quakers. Can you tell us kind of how long ago that was? What made you first come to Quakers, and what were you seeking when you started coming?
I would think it would be about between 45 and 50 years ago when I was living in Hull with my early family. And I was first of all teaching there, teaching art, and then I was also doing another degree at the university there. But while I was there, my then in-laws, who were Methodists, who were based in Nottingham, which is my home area, became Quakers. And I thought, how extraordinary. They were, what I'd always considered to be almost fundamentalist Methodists in the way that they conducted their lives and their ways of worship. So, shortly after this revelation, and we were visiting them, my then mother-in-law said, well, why don't you come to a meeting and you can see what the Quaker worship is all about. And it's fundamentally at the centre, if you like, I think, of one of the reasons why we did what we did. So I did. And it turned out to be the first of two or three revelations. Within the meeting, which was in Nottingham, about halfway through, what I now know the term is ministry took place. A woman who was sitting opposite me got up and ministered about a young couple who were part of the meeting who had just got married, and they were obviously on their honeymoon. And she was using this as an excuse to talk about the virtues of a good marriage. It had a sort of a happy part of marriage attached to her ministry. And I noticed, although it had been in silence for about half an hour before that, that the silence it was different. There was an extra listening, if you like, which I can describe it now in retrospect. And that was it. And at the end of the meeting, that was all the ministry, no more. At the end of the meeting, Helen, my mother-in-law, said, what do you think then, David? I said, yeah, she says. So I said, but the woman was still, there was a sort of an extra silence there. What was all that about? I said, I had not experienced that. Only once, perhaps in the theatre at a special moment. She said, well, that was observant of you, but did you notice the person that was sitting next to the person who ministered? The man, who was fairly bent forward, almost as though he was asleep. I said, yeah. She said, well, that was her husband. And this person who administered, by the way, was in a sort of late 60s, 70s. And she said he was, up until 3 or 4 weeks ago, a professor of something at Nottingham University. But it had just been diagnosed with an incurable brain disease, and he was terminally ill, and he was really not going to be lived much longer. So the ministry had then extra residence for the meeting because of their knowledge of this and the knowledge of what the ministry was about marriage, and she was relating that, and there was this marriage coming to an end and one that was just beginning. And I thought, wow. She said, well, what do you think about that? I said, well, I've never experienced that sort of spontaneous story, narrative I was an Anglican as a child, a chorister, went through all of that. And I said, I've never noticed that before. So I said, that was quite refreshing. And I quite enjoyed the silence because I quite like sometimes getting away from the life, whatever. That was the first. Very quickly after that, in a school that I was teaching in, there was a student who came to the art department I was in, and it turned out that she was living in a Quaker, like a hostage really, like a place in Hull for unmarried mothers. And the Quaker came out of that. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And almost at the same time, you can see I've had this collection of thoughts in my head. I played basketball, and I was playing basketball at Hull Jail for the young teachers, as they were called then, and the people who were inmates, lots of life, president and so forth. But I noticed that while we were all changing in the same gymnasium for the game, and at the end of the game, one of my teaching colleagues was quietly sitting next to one of the inmates, and I could see a very sort of discreet little conversation going on. And we weren't supposed to really make that sort of contact, but he was doing it very, very cleverly and quietly. So again, when I went out, I said, "What's all that about? What were you doing? How did you put in?" He said, "Well, this person that I was speaking to is coming out of jail in about a fortnight." And he said, "And I'm going to be part of an organisation that's going to be helping him resettle into the community because he doesn't have any relatives." I said, "Well, where's that coming?" I said, and then he said, "I'm a Quaker." So very quickly in this sort of period of time, the Quaker movement, which I knew absolutely nothing about, emerged. And from then on, for other reasons later on, I then decided that I would like to inquire some more. And when I moved from there to Helmsley, which is in North Yorkshire, and the nearest Quaker meeting house was Kirby Moorside, I started attending there, and it really went from there.
So, so you were really impressed then by the people that you met, as well as the meetings that you attended, it
Yes.
sounds like. So I wonder, what do you remember about the first few years of attending meeting? Did it become something like a big part of your life?
Well, it did. It followed. It was that space being allowed to develop. Nobody sort of wrapped themselves around me when I went to the meeting and, want you to do this and do that. I just observed. And one of my early meetings from there, which was a similar sort of thing, at Kirby Moorside, there were one or two children in the meeting, and in the simple little table in the middle with the inevitable little posy of flowers, underneath was one or two little books. And for the first 15 minutes in the meeting was how it was organised there. The children came in and then they went out after 15 minutes and went out the version of whatever Quaker attention elsewhere, until they came in at the end of the meeting. And this was a little child who had watched for a few weeks, who was picking up language. And she called her and got the book out and opened it up at the beginning and said, "Donkey, donkey." And she got this donkey and it came out, and the meeting wanted to chuckle and so forth. And then it was quite near the end of the 15 minutes, and then she closed it again, and then they went. And straight after that, an elderly woman then stood up and ministered and took that as a theme. She'd listened to it and she talked about herself being a bit of an ass sometimes. They were talking that sort of biblical reference, I suppose, as well, that came into it from the Bible. And then a bit later on, right at the end of the meeting, an old man who was a conscientious objector, I found out later on, he remembered a poem, I think it was by, I thought it was Walter Delamere, I can't remember the author now, but it was called The Donkey. And I can even remember some of the words, "When fishes flew and forest walks and fig flew upon thorns, some moment when," and it was all about the sort of things that he had to live by and abide by, being a conscientious objector in the war. But the message, the ministry from that anybody beginning had been listened to and responded to and felt, and I thought, again, it's another space that I've been in where this can happen. It's not programmed in that sense, and I welcome that. And then they did all sorts of things like tools for self-reliance that went on there, which is one of the, I mean, there's all sorts of activities that they did locally, and all free, but all part of the same sort of thinking about elsewhere. And I became involved with that, and then in the end, quietly thought, well, I'm hanging on the end of all of this. I'm an attender for about a year and more, and I think it's about time I sort of put myself onto the wavelength permanently and try and live by what it was I'd picked up so far. And I failed miserably, of course, but it's been a wonderful 40 years more since then. That's
Mm.
very much so.
So you came from Anglicanism, Church of England. So
Yeah.
would do you still think of yourself as a Christian? Do you read the Bible? Do you use God language?
I don't read the Bible. I know the Bible, I know the stories, the narratives of them, and sometimes the stories that came from the pulpit over a childhood up until I was in my early teens. I was a chorister, so music I remember obviously for me as part of it, and singing became a part of my sort of social life. But God became something different. And as with all Quakers, they all have their version of. And whenever I heard God, I don't bristle, I don't, tighten up, but I try and find my way around it. And I found my way around identifying it. Whereas God, of course, in the Anglican Church is set and it's biblical, it's programmed, it's a whole thing, which was okay at the time. It was where I was. But eventually, I think I became agnostic and so forth into my mid-20s and so forth before I actually started moving in another direction. And I remember reading something of, what's the name of the famous Indian guru? Anyway, I was reading this particular passage, Gandhi, of course, and one of the pieces that I was reading from Gandhi, and he sort of broke away and he said, I don't think of God is love, was the statement that he was making. He'd stopped that and abbreviated it and turned it round and said, love is God. And I thought, oh, I can't do it the other way around. I can't personify, I can't think of all the things that were there as part of that catalogue of the faith. Where do I find it? What am I trying to look for around me? So every time, if you like, I mean, any form of love, kindness, gentleness, generosity, all of that, that's where it is. That's my God.
Yeah.
No, I can't express it any other way.
And of course, your original story was about relationships and marriage and
Yeah,
community, really, and knowing each other deeply. And of
yeah,
course, you and I know each other from being in Rawdon. We've both
we do
lived in
indeed.
the same cottage. I moved in after you, and I do think that community and relationships is really where many of us come to feel God's presence then is through, as you say, gentle relationships, and especially the ones that you can find in Quaker meeting.
Yes, as you're saying that, feeling God's presence, I'm sensing for you almost a personification. I'm not sure, but that's how it comes through. I can't even think of it like that. So when I hear it in that form or any other form,
Mm.
it says it in that way, which it happens, of course, in the meeting with people who have whatever is their version. I can't quite see it like that, but I listen to it and I think, oh well, if that's the way it works for,
Yeah.
then
Well, I mean,
we're on the same wing.
it's not necessarily a personification. I mean, I think it could just be a warmth and an energy, and I don't think it's necessarily a personification. But I remember one thing you said to me when I moved into the Quaker cottage, and you said something about these walls, just look at these walls, they've seen a lot, they've seen it all. And obviously, as you will remember, I was going through a relationship breakup
Yes, I
and
do.
then moving in there. It was a very vulnerable time, and I really feel a sense of, warmth within, and the fact that it's called Quaker Cottage, and as you say, it's 300 years old, and a very formative building for me, really, and
Yeah.
I expect for you as well.
Was for me, definitely. Yeah, the same way,
Yeah,
exactly that. Yeah.
yeah. Because I wonder, you've talked a lot about the arts in our conversation so far, you've talked about poetry, you've talked about movies, you've talked about art and singing. Um, what do you make of the fact that Quakers have moved away from that, actually? Quakers historically had quite a problem, didn't they, with the arts? Do you do you feel that Quakers have a good relationship with the arts now?
I do, yes, I do. I've never seen it like that. I've just seen it that they will accept anything that has its sort of its authentic narrative background. You know, it's an experiential thing, isn't it? All the
Mm,
arts that I'm involved with are all part of my life experience. They're embodied in whether I'm drawing, painting, making, building, whatever. And what is fascinating is the fact that when you think of the events that we had at Rawdon meeting for 28 years, the Amnesty series concerts, which were massive in the end for this tiny meeting. I mean, almost not national, but we had
mm,
top professional musicians, writers,
mm,
actors, etc., performing 8, 10 times a year from Easter once every month to Christmas for 28 years and raised something like, or they were all free concerts, you know, and they were full of all sorts of groups of people who came to support them. And in the end, you know, we even had lots of, and they were all mainly professional performers who were doing it for nothing. They were
mm.
doing it because they believed in the amnesty cause, etc. And so the meeting house, its ghosts were full of the arts for that. And yet, in a meeting for worship, there was never any music. And yet we had a number of musicians in our meeting who were professional, keen amateur singers, players, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I do remember actually when I was doing some research in Japan, and I went to Japan, general meeting in Tokyo. I was absolutely astonished in the middle of the meeting there when one of a Japanese friend of mine who was next to me invited me to go to the meeting, knowing of my Quaker background. And within about 10 minutes into the meeting, she stood up and started singing a hymn and doing verse 1 and 2 of, etc., etc. And I was astonished because I thought I've never had I think probably once I can remember, perhaps Barbara at some point many years ago in the middle of was inspired to sort of just sing a little something and put it in, but never ever was that part of the meeting. So in this empty space, the one thing that I knew a lot of our meeting and a lot of people who are Quakers who are involved in arts in one way or another, they don't actually bring it into this
Mm.
silent worship.
And of course, you said about going to Japan, and of course, one of the things that you did for me and with me is you helped me make this mask.
Yes,
Um, and you recognize this, of course, but I mean,
it's yes, yes.
this must be 15 years ago or something that we
Oh
made.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a commedia dell'arte mask. Commedia dell'arte, the Italian comedy, and I designed a whole set of those, and that was one of the characters. Yeah,
And is that kind of thing a spiritual thing for you? Is your, because I know you're a playwright as well, and you're a dry stone waller, there's a lot of creativity in your life.
yeah.
Do you find that a spiritual path? Is that separate from, or is it kind of all integrated together for you?
Generally speaking, it sort of kept my head clean as well as clear.
Hmm.
If, for instance, all the years I've been designing, well, let's take the build of walls, dry stone walls. You know, you can arrive in midwinter with absolutely extraordinary conditions, but unless it's sort of 10 degrees below and the stone is frozen together, or it's thick with snow and you can't actually do it, whatever the conditions, you've no excuse for not being able to walk. But once you're in there and you've got this jumble of rocks in front of you, and you have the skills and the knowledge to make, but you've got to make that choice. Every stone has got to be selected to pick the one that's just been put in, the one that's going to follow it, and all the rest of it, and produce something which is going to be there for another 100 years. and also has to look beautiful. It's all consuming. You can't have anything going on outside. You can have a partner who might be ribbing you on the other side of the wall, who's doing that side and so forth. And the same thing applies really when I'm drawing or painting and I'm focusing and looking at them, making decisions at everything, making many mistakes as well. They'll always leave you mistakes in there. They're part of the process. But all of that has its own, it's outside me. So call it spiritual, you can put a title to it if you like, but following that idea, that's where and I think it's kept me not always on the straight and narrow, but for a lot of it at the time, it's kept me with that sense of balance. But this morning I've just been to Harrogate. Two things. One is a book that I've been written with my daughter. She's illustrated, I've done it, and it's taken 2.5 years. And we were meeting two people who were interested in its publication. The book's only arrived 2 days ago from the printers. So, and this had been arranged. So that was that's where I've been before this. And also, I designed a piece for Horticap for a new Tesco development. It was to celebrate Horticap outside. I had a meeting with that after that. So those two worlds came, today, so it's still going. It's still, I can't wake up in the morning and think, what have I got to do today apart from get my breakfast, get washed, get this, do this, blah, 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 because there's something that I always have here. But that's part of the creative spirit, I think, and I'm privileged to be able to still do that.
And would you say that, this when you say there's this power that's outside of yourself that's guiding the creativity? Obviously that's a spiritual way of understanding it, isn't
Yeah.
it? And I'm wondering if you feel that your life has been led in other ways. Has it affected other parts of your life, or is it a creative thing for you? Do you feel led, I suppose?
Well, I think if you're aware of your behaviour as well and what you've done and what your relationships are. I've got a big family, all the rest of it, and you make many mistakes. And you can either acknowledge them and do something about it. And how do you find that out? You have to wait to be told you're an absolute whatever. Or do you say, I can't go on like this is not right, I've got to do, etc., etc. And that was also, I think, part of where I was at when I first joined a meeting, decided I need to change from the world that I had before, where I was always almost a sort of an arrogance of this is what I thought, this is what I'm learning, not learning, not being able to listen and to embrace everything that's coming in. And that's not what the creative process is about as well. It's about being able to see more clearly. I don't necessarily think that it was all bad, but I needed to have some sort of change to sort of sort out where I was at. And something outside, and being aware of it as well, I think was part of the fortunate way in which I was able to sort of help myself, to guide myself in another direction.
So that's the power of community and relationships again, isn't
Yeah.
it? I'm wondering where you are with it now. So many years later, you're still a Quaker, you're still going to meeting regularly. What is it that you get out of it now on a week by week basis?
It's just that it's an anchor, really, an anchor. At this moment, I'm 83. I've been quite poorly recently, and I know I'm coming. I know I'm coming to the other end. I can see the end of all of this, and all of a sudden, you've got this sort of catalogue of stuff and experience and files and masks and drawings and family and massive sort of things. And all of a sudden, that mortality has put it all in front of me. It's never been in front of me, because I'm always, oh, and I'm suddenly using, I think, my experience and also that sort of sharing with and trust with the community which I belong to, the Quaker community, to be able to sit down by myself and with others to start rationalising what I must do at this stage of my life. And I've never ever had that before. I've always, even though I'm the age as I am now, it's always been going on, and not anymore.
And do you think the Quakers have changed over your experience from when you began? Do you think it's changing in a good direction or the wrong direction, or what would you?
But the thing I miss is young people, is youth and childhood and children. Of course, in our meeting at the beginning, we had my own children who were part of the meeting or whatever, and others came in. Not many, because it was a fairly small meeting. But we haven't had young people in the meeting getting in generations. So, like a lot of these organisations, a lot of these different faiths, they're experiencing the same thing. You're there in your youth, doing what you do and taking on the responsibilities of Quakerism, which we share. And then you're all getting older and you're all getting tired and you're all getting, I can't do that anymore, this is not possible, etc., etc. It's physically as well as mentally. But if there's no continuum with the next generation, so I look at, I bewail that. We fortunately have a few people in their middle years that have joined the meetings, and we have a young man who is professionally working for the Quakers, looking after the sort of the development of young Quakers in North Yorkshire, Joe, who's at the centre to Yorkshire meeting, and he's chosen to come to our meeting. So on Sunday, for instance, I mean, he's decided our meeting is where he feels at home to be able to do what he does. And on Sunday, he brought his two daughters, who were, what, I don't know, must be 12 and 11. To be to one of them has been coming fairly regularly with him, and she'll sit and draw and whatever. Through the meeting, no sort of coming in for 15 minutes and going out, or at the end and coming in, but they, and this Sunday for the first time, the other one came. And it was lovely, yeah. Just lovely when they come in.
Yeah.
And another one as well, who's in her mid-20s, who comes regularly now, who's become a Quaker and has been part of protests, has been put in prison for doing what she does in terms of various sort of environmental issues that she's been done, and she's, I mean, etc. So they come in like, but outside that, unlike at Carlton Hill, which is the centre meeting, as you know, in Leeds, where a lot of the university and there's transient people who are coming all the time. It's a big meeting, as in York. We miss that, so I miss that.
So what would you say is your hopes for the future then? What would you say for the next 100 years, What hopes do you have for us as a faith tradition?
Um, I've not really sat down and thought about that because I tend to be living in the present. In terms of Quakers, I suppose really selfishly it's been there for me. I'm in a familiar place with familiar people, and I'm desperate to get new people coming in. But the problem, as I see it, is once you start opening up, as we did when we first arrived there, with all the things we did in terms of outreach in a meeting, if you have many ideas about how to get people in and what to encourage, but you have to identify somebody who's willing to organise that and to oversee it. And the meeting, as in its present strength or fragility, each time we get a suggestion, the first question that comes up is who? Who is going to, and if they do, then you'll find that other people will come in and help, but it's who's going to take over that role. And I've got a few roles that I take on, and I won't take on any more. I can't do any more. So when those come up, I'm with those people, look around and see, well, who's going to be taking that spot. That's the thing, because it's unpaid, unprofessional, social giving on a big scale. I think that's wonderful, But the reality of it, particularly at this period is that I think is the struggle. Outreach, wonderful. I can sit down and outreach as long as you like, but then it becomes who, what, when, how. It's the logistics of it.
So do you think that will happen? Are you hopeful that it still is a tradition that has something to offer the next generation?
Oh, I think so. Yes, a number of people that you meet and you come up again. You know, it's you might be in a conversation with somebody, and in the middle of it, somebody will say, "Well, why did it? Why? I'm a Quaker." So as you say you're a Quaker, then there's got to be an exposition of why, what, how, and what it does. Well, if I had a faith, I'm sure that some that I never think about that, etc., etc. But it's making it happen is the. I mean, in Leeds, I'm on the a committee that's involved with meeting houses and of course adult meeting house is now going through, as you know, through my
Mm.
own a process of seeing how they can best sell off the premises without losing the meeting house, and how they can rearrange the meeting without having to use the meeting house and all its plant that has to be maintained and looked after in the minister. We're in a similar position, although we're slightly over adult. But you think this is interesting because this could be a precursor to where we may find ourselves. So keep your ears open, boy, and see what, how this is going to unfold and the reasons why, and how you either A, avoid that or think that was a good idea. That will work.
Mm.
I don't know. How about where you are in Swansea? How does that work?
Well, we're a kind of a city centre meeting, I suppose. We're more similar in that respect to Carlton Hill
Yeah.
in Leeds. We're more similar to that meeting where there's a lot of new people coming in each time.
Yes.
And every week probably, or maybe every other week, we'll have a new person come and see what's going on. And I
Yes.
think you've then got to think, well, what is it that we do to welcome them and make sure they understand what's going on and they're made to feel very welcome.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where we are. But I
Yeah.
mean, I'm very hopeful that we've still got something very much to offer the new generation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I do wonder sometimes whether these meeting houses, we've got a few too many, and that this is a helpful process of trying to, you know, sell some of them and to keep the central ones perhaps, or to keep a network of meeting houses is perhaps the way
I'm a
forward.
wrong person to ask about Rawdon because, of course, I was a caretaker there for a while.
Mm, mm,
My wife and then we became joint wardens
mm.
for 13, 14 years
Yeah,
with a
yeah.
young family there and all of that. And I loved the place.
Mm,
I loved everything about it.
I know.
And what it did for me during that time, which was 99% was a happy time. At the end, it wasn't, but in the
Mm.
period when I was living there, bringing up a family, following my Quaker, etc., etc., it was
Yes, and we become very attached to these buildings is the thing.
absolutely,
And the thought of selling them is a bit heartbreaking, really.
yeah. And it was how it works as well. I mean, the buildings and Quaker, I mean, they're not all the same.
Mm,
The
mm,
personalities of every meeting house is as different as the people that occupy it. And right,
yeah.
although the message one hopes when you go there is although it's going to be different, it's bespoke in that sense. The same thing is like when I would mention Japan, all of a sudden the song burst out and a hymn was said, and somebody read a piece from the Bible and all of that, and yet it still felt like a Quaker meeting.
Mm. And I think I mean, we both know Rawdon Meeting House in particular and the cottage, but as
Yeah,
you say, there's such a lot of love gone into every aspect of that building and that garden and the walls and the everything about it, the furniture even. It
yeah,
has all been loved and crafted
yeah.
and yeah.
And it
It,
still is, new borders,
yes.
new,
So it will be a sad day if we lose it.
absolutely, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, let it unfold. We'll have to let it unfold
Yes,
and trust, I suppose.
yes. I mean, I don't lose any sleep about it unfolding at this moment,
No.
but at the same time, I'm listening and being aware very much of what's
Yeah.
going on around me in terms of other meetings and us and the
Mm.
reality of
Mm. Mm.
where I'm at.
Well, well, thank you very much for talking to me,
My
David.
pleasure,
That's
yes.
lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you again as well. And my best to Iona as well. Lots of love.
Mm.
Okay, bye.